Hey everybody, it's Elizabeth from Silvernest Homeschool, mama 4, been homeschooling for 11 years now, and I want to take you back. Nobody really wants to go back, but we're going to go back to 2020 and COVID and what happened. Okay, so we were already homeschooling, so for us it really wasn't that much of an interruption to the curriculum we were using or the things we were doing, except that some of my kids were taking some classes elsewhere. Excuse me. And so those classes all went online and we actually dropped more of them, and I actually did more homeschooling than I was planning that year, but we were really in the groove. It was not really a problem. My brother and his wife, however, they had been putting their kids in a school and it just wasn't working for them for that year. So they decided to homeschool for that 1 year, which was a wise choice for a lot of parents, just being able to pull their kids out and be able to focus. And so thankfully my mom already taught science class. So they just added their kids to the science class, at least their oldest kid. And then the second one was only 4. And then the little one was at home with mama, right? So you just add in one more kid, no big deal. Well, so the 4-year-old and I got to homeschool, and I just want to do what we did for that 4-year-old after I had already homeschooled all my other 4 kids, and how we spent that time. We usually spent about 2 hours a week in one shot. It wasn't it was supposed to be like a preschool experience. So we weren't really trying to like cover necessarily all the subjects, and we also weren't trying to give him a full class experience, but we were trying to give him more flavor outside of the house from mom and dad, get him some more information, just let him play, and using some of the things that I already learned. So they were really gracious to let me do that. We had so much fun, and we're still buddies. And so that went well, right? Because you still like each other when you finish. That's always really good. But let me go over the things we did in hopes that it will help you when you're thinking, like, what does preschool mean in homeschooling? Now, I am a big proponent of play more over formal schooling in those early ages, like outside, run around, things like that. And we were in a small, well, not super small, but we were in a room for that whole time while the other kids were outside in the other room. And so some of the things that I did was based on the necessity of the space that we were in. And yes, we did go outside for some nature walks and things like that, but they really wanted them to focus on the learning during that time period. Okay, so first thing that I recommend for any preschool that you're doing at homeschool is Play-Doh or any kind of squishy type of GAC or anything like that, but specifically Play-Doh. Homemade versions are great. Why? Well, one, it's fun, right? This is school, what? But 2, actually the manipulation with the Play-Doh strengthens the hands of the kids so that they can hold a pencil, a marker, a crayon, and be able to write their letters. This is actually one of the best things you can do for your preschoolers, is let them play with Play-Doh. The benefits are huge. The tactile, the challenges. Now he had some eczema on his hands, so actual Play-Doh was a little bit, it has all that salt in it, so it would sting. So that's why we tried some other kinds of like floof and things like that were a little more friendly for his hands. But using Play-Doh is a great starter. They're also, you can make the letters out of it, you can make the numbers out of it, you can count with it if you want to make it more actually academic. But I really like to just let them go at it, give them a few tools. The simpler, the better. The less that you fill their brains with those extra, this is the right way to play. Some molds are fine, but just like keep it simple, because, grab some tools from the kitchen. You don't have to make it complicated. Those are actually better for them. Their brains, their creativity, their imagination is not as kept down by that. And also the challenge of them being able to think creatively without thinking, I have to have these other things in order to think creatively. So that's the first thing we did. The second thing we did was we did some language arts by using story cubes. And you've probably seen these if you've been here before, but they are dice that you roll that have pictures on them. And each one has a bunch of different pictures. So when you roll them, then we would tell the stories together. So he would pick one that he wanted to tell. Once I had a backpack, and I filled it with all my favorite things. Then it would be my turn, and I'd pick one and say, one of my favorite things was an axe. I like to take it with me because it was good for chopping firewood when I needed it for the family. And then, we would just keep going. But one day it made me angry because I lost my axe, So we just keep going telling the story, practicing communication, practicing storytelling, creativity, all of that fun thing. Along with that, he also had a workbook that his parents sent with him. And so he would sit down for a certain amount of time, usually 4 or 5 minutes, and do a couple of pages in there, which he enjoyed, practicing his letters and just making sure things were written. And then also some more very simple math. But the other thing that we love to do for math, we actually played this, but we also played math dice. So different games using math. And the dice that were in math dice, you're actually just, doesn't matter which dice you use, but you're kind of rolling and trying to fill the different squares as you go around. So you're trying to say, okay, if I have 1 + 1, then I get to fill the 6 in, that kind of thing. We use this for punching down, like if I rolled 10, I get to punch off 10 of these. And so my goal is to finish my side before you finish your side. And you can use, depending on the brain and the child, you can use the really fancy dice that have even more numbers, or for the younger children, again, preschool, you're sticking with the smallest dice. And then if you're just introducing the first 6, you just even use 1 die. Okay, so simple. Should have gone the other way. 1 dice, die, 2 dice, then 3 dice, or adding in. So you can actually manipulate, but counting, lots of counting, actual counting, counting the snacks that came in, counting how many fruit snacks did you get, how many were there orange, how many were green, how many were red. Okay, if I add all my fruit snacks with your fruit snacks, how many fruit snacks do we had together? Oh, now we're eating our fruit snacks. How many fruit snacks do we have now? All that practical hands-on math, okay? So the other thing you can do is get your letter tiles. Okay, these can be from bananagrams, these can be from an old Scrabble game, and we would build words. And we would just sit there and make words. We had apple letters, that was the actual game we were using, and then we would sound things out using our letter tiles, building our own words. And we would make silly words and then practice those as well. What if that was a word, then how would we sound it out? Because the point of phonics is teaching them to say something based on what is there, right? So if they create this really funny word, then they'll have me read it and I read it so silly, and then we laugh and we giggle, all that kind of thing. All right. The other thing, of course, we did a lot of was books, right? Lots of books, lots of sitting in laps, lots of reading. I love Ted Rand. I love, goodness, my brain, Jan Brett. She makes me happy. Sorry about the shiny. And I also love just great literature, great books. And then he would read to me. We would practice some with some Bob books, and he would read some a little bit here and there. And no pressure, though. That was because he wanted to, okay? This kid was super smart, is super smart. And so, yeah, we would practice a few words here and there. But I tried to mix it up. And each activity we did took about 5 to 7 minutes before we moved on. And then I'll come to my absolute favorite thing that we did, that I invented because we were in that room and we were there for a long time. Now, I did study with preschool before I moved into being a homeschool mom and working with my own children. I actually spent quite a few years in preschool and was also trained by a woman on how to work in our church nursery who was a librarian. So she had a lot of tips and tricks on how to include everything and bring everything back to what you're learning. So when I worked for her, it would be like, okay, the blocks represent this. This week we're going to discuss Noah. We're going to use the blocks to build a boat. And we're also going to, in the kitchen, we're going to pack food we would take for the boat. And then if we play with the animals, we're going to pick which animals are going to go on the boat, right? So everything was all related to that. So in the same way, we were in this room, and so we would take anything we found that we were playing with, you know, little people or whatever, we count them, that kind of thing, but also how did they maybe relate to the story that we read, act out the story, tell me the story, that kind of thing for memory and development. And then, because we had all these books, hardback kid books, and we needed to do fine motor skills, which is your building things, little tiny things, picking up stuff with, we did this a little bit, picking up stuff with tweezers, moving it, sort of Montessori activities. But then you want to do what we call gross motor skills, which means whole body practice and whole body improvement, right? This is part of those first few grades really need, like preschool and maybe kindergarten, you know, you need to have those like ability to practice all that coordination. And so what we did was we set up a bunch of books like this, and then line them up a certain amount apart from each other. And then he would jump the books and count them. And we would see how many books he could actually jump over and count. And so sometimes his legs would go around them and sometimes he'd go over them, and then I would jump and he would laugh at me. But we would try to come up with things that were gross motor skills and fine motor skills. So maybe a bucket, and we would try to throw stuffed animals in the bucket or the basket. We talk about why it was harder or easier depending on the container and the item we were throwing. And a lot of it's just the intentionality behind it. And, you know, he thrived, did awesome. We had a great time. And at the end, he went to kindergarten next year, and his teacher just couldn't believe it. She's just like, this kid. Now, I have to say, this kid is this kid. Like, he's amazing. And I'm just grateful that I got to be part of that learning process for him. But he still loves